Starting off our list today, we have the former king of Denmark, Christian VII, a man who spent pretty much his entire life acting like a child. Christian took to the throne at just 16 years of age in 1766, during which time he caused many a scandal and much chaos for his royal family members as well as his wife, his staff, and his people. Some of Christian's crazy quirks included inviting important guests and dignitaries to dinner parties, and then when the dignitaries greeted him and bowed, the king would hop over their backs as though he was engaging in a game of leapfrog. And once everyone was seated for dinner and the food was served, the young king would begin flinging the menu items around the room at his dinner guests. After marrying his cousin just 1 year after taking the throne, Christian would often run through the streets of his kingdom with his mistress, patronizing local shops and brothels in drunken fits of bad behavior. It is also said that at one point in time the young king built his own torture rack and ordered people to tie him to the device and flog him in some sort of strange pursuit of pleasure. Next up on our list today we have Emperor Zheng, another young ruler who partook in some pretty strange behaviors while in power. At the age of just 14, Zheng became the 11th emperor of the Ming dynasty in 1505 and ruled until he passed at the age of 29 in 1521. Uninterested in being a ruler at such a young age, an uninterest that would remain all the way into adulthood, the emperor assigned eunuchs to all positions of power and allowed them to run the government in his place. While ignoring his duties, the young ruler engaged in various lavish and outlandish behaviors and activities, which were paid for by the tax dollars of his people. If you are thinking that this is already sounding pretty bad, listen up, because one of Zheng's all-time favorite activities was raiding the homes of the wealthy, kidnapping their daughters, and then demanding a ransom for the girls' safe return. And anyone who disputed this reckless behavior was arrested, tortured, and executed. And as you can imagine, there were a lot of people who disputed this behavior. The terror did eventually come to a fitting end when in 1505 the emperor's pleasure barge capsized and Zheng drowned in the chaos. After his death, the eunuchs, which had been placed in charge of running China's government, had garnered so much power within political structures that even new rulers of the dynasty were unable to remove the eunuchs from their positions. Next up, we've got Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, who, in all fairness, was a pretty good ruler. In fact, some might even say great. The scandal here really lies in her, extracurricular appetite. Catherine, originally named Sophie, was born in Germany but moved to Russia after marrying her husband Peter III in 1745. It was said that Peter had much less of an appetite, and he often disregarded his wife's company for that of toy soldiers and imaginary worlds. Thus began Catherine's spiral into sexual insatiability. In 1796, one of Catherine's many lovers murdered Peter, and she took her position as Empress of Russia. After stepping into power at the age of 33, her desires for the company of men only grew, and she was by no means frugal towards her lovers either, gifting one with 1,000 laborers and declaring another king of Poland, who she eventually declared war against after a pretty fierce lover's spat in which Catherine accused him of being unobedient. The story of Catherine's death has been quite disputed over the years, but one version tells that she met her end during a zealous rendezvous with a palace horse. Historians, however, maintain that she suffered a stroke on the toilet and died the following day, which is the most likely but a far less interesting explanation for sure. Next up, we have Justin II, Emperor of Byzantium. Which at its peak included modern-day Italy, Greece, Turkey, as well as some portions of North Africa and the Middle East. During Justin's rule from 1565 to 1578 AD, he was prone to acting up. He was known for constantly trying to bite officials of the court, making animal noises at passersby, and hitting people at random, unprovoked times. Many officials of the court would take turns pulling the mad emperor around the castle in a wagon in an attempt to calm his nerves, but unfortunately all efforts proved futile, and people began to speculate that Justin was possessed by the devil. It was at this time that his wife Sophia, who was taking care of him, became kind of like a regent, making many political decisions on his behalf. From possessed by the devil to worshipping it, we have Marquise de Montespan, who was accused of just that after she caused a whole lot of trouble way back in the late 16 and early 1700s. You see, although both the Marquise and the King of France, Louis XIV, were married, the two had sparked up an affair for the ages, and they weren't exactly subtle about it either, with the king on many occasions showering the Marquise with intricate gifts and spending more time with her than his actual wife, Marie Therese of Austria. Austria. It appears, however, that much like Catherine the Great, Marquise became insatiable, infatuated with the king's attention, and she wished to become queen herself. Marquise de Montespan divorced her husband and began spending more time with the queen in an attempt to assess the situation and figure out her next best steps, during which time she also befriended a Parisian witch. Together, the witch and the Marquise began cooking up love potions made from the bones of some incredibly vulnerable members of society. It was this gruesome feat that led many to believe Marquise had turned to devil worship in the first place. Everything began to fall apart in 1679 after many members of the court experienced poisoning, and the two women came under investigation. The witch was burnt at the stake, while Marquise ran for the hills, in which she ironically spent the rest of her days living in a convent.
Number 10 is Eric XIV. That's a lot of Erics to get to 14, and it's a lot of paranoia in his case. The Swedish king survived 3 years of ruling before he lost his mind, first taking the throne in 1560 and then having his life taken in 1577. In 1563, when the crazy struck, Eric became violent and paranoid, rubbing his nobility and court members the wrong way until he pulled a daring move, imprisoning the Sturz noble family for allegedly plotting against him. However, he quickly came to the conclusion that the incarceration wasn't enough and decided to have them killed instead. Eric himself participates in their grisly deaths, and after their death sentences, Eric wandered outside to the woods and disappeared for 3 days. This led to open conflict between Sweden's nobility and Eric, who was eventually dethroned and imprisoned by his despised half-brother John in 1569. The former king languished in prison for the next 7 years before being put out of his misery in 1577. Turns out Eric's paranoia may have been onto something. After the 20th century exhumation, forensic scientists determined Eric died from his pea soup being poisoned. Number 9 is the Glutton, a nickname for King Afonso, also called the Grinning Moron. A nickname he earned from doing things like wearing 6 hats at once, tiered Mad Hatter style, or because he visited all the nunneries around to offer himself up as a willing bedmate. This is also the king who famously saw his 2 older siblings die, and instead of crying, he cheered and went, "Hooray, now I will be the king of Portugal." All of this perceived madness allegedly comes from how Afonso was ill as a child, and it left him partially paralyzed and mentally unstable. Unfortunately, he found pleasure in violence, and this made for a bad combination, especially when a local boy named Antonio, who liked to whip stones at people, offered the king knives and said he should join. Afonso's mother tried to stop her son, who now went out at night and tormented the poor villagers, and forbade Antonio to enter the palace. Deprived from Antonio's company, Afonso became completely unmanageable and refused to eat food like a brat, so they let Antonio back in. He soon established himself in a room next to Afonso and began to lead the king on nightly excursions, jumping respectable citizens and raiding taverns. This goes on for years until his mother dies and Antonio is sent away. Then Afonso focuses his attention onto food. At the age of 23, Afonso was incredibly large thanks to gluttony. He used to take his meals in bed and usually ate and drank so much he was sick afterwards. Ministers ruled on behalf of the screw-loose Afonso for years, but they still tried to make Afonso behave like a king. Told what to do, he did it. Told what to say, he said it. Still, his way of life infuriated the Portuguese clergy, so they find him a wife, hoping it'd calm him down. Instead, they annul, and she marries his younger, hotter brother, and the two begin planning a coup. In his final days, like many of the other monarchs on this list, he was confined. It was said he wore a groove in the floor from pacing since he couldn't do anything else. Number 8 is Snotty King. Unlike Afonso, who victimized the nearby villages, France's King Charles IX actually went after others in his court, including his sisters and even animals. Charles had a disfiguring birthmark between his nose and upper lip, giving him the nickname the Snotty King, and he was given to fits of rage and sadism, though he was a mama's boy to his regent Catherine de Medici, who literally ran this country even once the king grew up. In 1561, at the age of 10, Charles took the throne after all eligible heirs had died, through no fault of his own. As he grew up, Charles became tall and physically strong, but his physical and mental problems increased with age, and as one suffered, so did the other. Charles was unbalanced to the point of insanity, and his anger was solved through violence or death that only Margot, his youngest sister, knew how to calm. If she wasn't around, someone would hand him a bow and arrow and say, "Hey, go hunt some deer nearby." However, things like hunting and field sports didn't satisfy his bloodlust, and that's exactly what it was, bloodlust. To quote Charles himself, he preferred to use the knife because he liked the blood and wanted to see it spurting out of animals. Shudder. So he fed this lust by dismembering domestic animals. He also liked lashing people until they bled, or going down to the blacksmith to beat out weapons for his armory until he was prostrate with exhaustion. Then he'd go use them on more animals, or people. Number 7 is Fyodor the Bellringer, who was the son of Ivan the Terrible and wasn't thrilled about ruling and left most of it up to his brother-in-law father-in-law Boris Godunov. This would-be ruler is remembered for having next to no neck and spindle legs that made him shuffle in a stooped manner. That and his glazed vacant gaze paired with a permanent guileless smile that was variously ascribed to religious ecstasy or simple-mindedness, depending on the observer's point of view. Suffice it to say, even Ivan the Terrible knew his son was missing a few screws. So, anticipating his own death, Ivan had tried to smooth the path for his humbly gifted son by creating a 5-member advisory council to help him rule, which is how Boris ends up in charge, because Fyodor didn't just not know how to rule, but he wasn't interested in doing so. In the 16th century Russia, feeble-mindedness was considered an especially inspired and childish form of wisdom, a foolishness in Christ. Apparently in the olden days, Russians characteristically looked at these persons with respect, if not reverence. This is why, unlike so many kingdoms on this list, Fyodor wasn't just tossed in a room and left to rot. Homeboy actually dies peacefully in his bed. Fyodor spent most of his time praying, visiting monasteries and churches throughout the realm, and of course, what he was named for, ringing the bells that called the faithful to mass. Number 6 is Maria of Portugal. She starts as Maria the Pious, the first undisputed queen regent of Portugal and the first monarch of Brazil, who spent the first 10 years of her reign as an eloquent and respected leader. Then 1786 rolls around and she needs to be carried back into her castle due to a random state of delirium that hits her. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the last. In 1786, Maria loses her husband/uncle, her eldest son and heir, her only daughter, and then her confessor consecutively. Maria had already been in a fragile state, but their losses caused her to nosedive into religious delirium, convinced she was going to hell for the sins of her father, claiming to see his black and charred corpse dragging itself along hallways of her home, or in her mind's eye, being tormented by demons. Visitors to her apartments would complain that they were tired of her constant screaming and wailing, which was only amplified by the bloodletting that was meant to cure it. According to some reports, she also became rather fond of wearing really tiny clothing.
Number 5. King Henry II. This is a quote that people believe was Nostradamus predicting the death of King Henry II, who actually was a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be scary. Hey, how do I tell you this? Well, at one point, Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible Henry, King of France. Unfortunately, Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death at the age of 40. In the summer of 1559, a terrible jousting accident went awry and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I told you it because many think that Nostradamus predicted this. The jousting incident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and his skull by one of his young soldiers, and the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one." Yeah, he's jousting and then the eye, and then it happened. That sucks. Number 4, Prince Charles the Vampire. Now, some of these theories, yeah, they're a bit out there. I didn't make them up. I wish I did, but I didn't. Some believers out there actually think Prince Charles is a vampire, a blood-sucking, flying, turning into a bat-looking vampire. I don't know. Why? Because Prince Charles is related to Vlad the Impaler. You know, that 15th century ruler who inspired the story of Dracula in Transylvania, who we're all pretty sure was a vampire. Now, it's a fun theory that went about, but Prince Charles having a piece of Romania is definitely helping out this case. We kind of believe this. The prince has been conserving forests and he even got property over there, so maybe he's a vampire, maybe not. Maybe he just likes property and castles. And Vlad the Impaler. I heard he's a great lad. A great Vlad. Number 3, shapeshifters. Awesome. I'm not actually Taylor, I'm someone else pretending to be. That's cool. That's why I'm so energetic today. This next theory I wish I could claim for my own again, but it was actually former BBC presenter David Icke. He takes the cake himself. Here we go. He has since revealed himself as a conspiracy theorist, and one that surrounds the royal family had me stunned. Icke and quite a few others claim that the royal family is part of the Illuminati. Yeah, and then all of them earn their power because their human ancestor mated with reptilian aliens. They were clapping alien reptilians. That's how they became royals. That's the trick. You gotta clap some reptilian alien. David says the theory actually explains why royal families are obsessed with keeping their bloodlines clean with other royals. And you know, incest. But the biggest what the part of all this has to be when David told the public that he knows people who have seen royal family members change into reptiles and then back into human form again. Number 2, leaked letters. We'll end with some recent leaked letters. We love those. We love some gossip. We mentioned Princess Diana. Well, we've got more stuff. We've got more tea. In May 2018, the royal wedding, it was thought at the time that Meghan's father was absent because of a heart attack that he suffered days before. But a year or so later, it's revealed that Thomas Markle and the new Duchess weren't as close. There was some drama, there was some beef going on in the family. Thomas spoke out against his own daughter. There was a scandal where Meghan spoke to Oprah, the tell-all that we all watched, and Meghan actually said to her father that if you tell me the truth about what happened, about working with paparazzi, then we can help and get through it. But he wasn't able to do that, and that for me has really resonated. Yeah, if my dad was working with paparazzi, showing them private letters as well, just for clout, I'd be upset too. As if my dad can't even open his iPad without me, let alone leak my letters. Number 1, personal sheet changer. I can't tell if this is the worst thing ever or the best, but it's kept me laughing for months now. Royals have been sweating constantly about other people trying to, take them out, right? It's a scary job. Everyone wants to attack you. I mentioned Boyd Jones on here a few times, that guy that stalked the Queen. It's terrifying. People are terrifying. Boyd Jones would go through the Queen's drawers and, big ooh. So historically, the royal family would try their best to anticipate any and all attacks. Be as safe as you can be, right? Of course. Like the kissing sheets, for example. Oh, have you heard about these kissing sheets, this royal position? A great deal of monarchs hired taste testers to make sure nobody poisoned them, that's normal. But they also had a guy who would get tucked in the king's sheets. I would much rather have the latter, know what I mean? King Henry VIII hired somebody to make sure the bed wasn't poisoned. So you were required to make the king's bed every morning, but you also had to rub all the sheets down everywhere before bedtime. You'd have to kiss the bed sheets to make sure they weren't poisoned. Yeah, sleep tight. I'll sleep here, boss. Here we go. Don't mind the old medieval dad breath all over your pillows. You're safe for the night. That's so gross. I can't even sleep in a hotel sometimes, let alone some dude. Mwah, 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 mwah. Mwah, mwah. I'm like, what are you doing? Get this guy out of here. Why is he kissing my bed? Clothes as well. That was also touched. Maybe not kissed, but it was for sure touched. Guys wearing my clothes in my bed, kissing my sheets? No way. I think I'd rather get poisoned. Take my jeans off, get out of there. Number 10, King Edward VIII. Directly after his father died in 1936, King Edward VIII took the throne, right? That's pretty normal. But the tides quickly turned when, less than a year later, he renounced his position. Now, this was of course a huge scandal right off the bat. This is not something that's taken lightly in the royal family. Turns out the woman responsible for stealing his heart was that of Wallis Simpson, American socialite who had already been divorced once before and was at this point working through her second divorce. So you can only imagine how everybody reacted at that point, right? Oh, how dare she? His proposal to Simpson, of course, caused social and political backlash. The Church of England wasn't so chill with Edward marrying someone who had already been divorced. Yeah, they're not really okay with that. So Edward was forced to abdicate. Yeah, he had to, right, for love. Edward and Simpson then tied the knot in 1937, and they stayed together until Edward's death much later in 1972. Sliding into royal DMs right off the hop. Okay, we're in for a treat. Number 9, dark predictions. Of course, in recent years, the royal family has seen a change that many didn't really expect. When Harry and Meghan chose to renounce their royalty status, speculation began that this could be the beginning of the end for the monarchy. People only fueled their fire with questions, and also, somebody may have called it. Yeah, Nostradamus, he may have predicted this entire event. One of his predictions literally reads, "At the end of the war, the great powers change. Near the coast are born 3 beautiful children. They will ruin the town when they come of age, they will change the kingdom, and they will not see it grow anymore." Now, Harry is only one of 2 children, so I'm not sure if the, quote was talking about him and his siblings, or if it has more to do so with some other royal family members, but either way, there's some people who take Nostradamus' words very, very seriously out there, so I had to include it. Maybe there's something there, I don't know. Maybe there's something we haven't quite breaking down yet. That's why we need National Treasure 3. Maybe this is the plot. Number 8, King Henry II. While we're on the topic of him, could Nostradamus have actually predicted the death of King Henry II? Because if he did, that's pretty curious, I'd say. Never used the word curious in my life, but I'm like, you know what? That's curious. King Henry II was actually a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be kind of cool, being friends with Nostradamus. I'd be like, hey, how does Game of Thrones end? Please. While at one point in history, Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible King Henry of France, unfortunately, Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death, might I add, at age 40. Yeah, in the summer of 1559, not a great time. A terrible jousting accident went wrong and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I have to explain because, it's history and, well, that's what we're here for. The jousting accident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and then his skull as well by one of his young soldiers. And the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one. It says he will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. Okay, already we're a little bit spooky. And that 2 wounds will ensure a cruel death. So I'm not saying he predicted it, I'm just saying, kind of nailed it. Number 7, a fateful turn of events. Queen Victoria, her reign began back in 1837 and it lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. Now at just age 18, Alexandrina Victoria had to rise up to the throne. Had to, right? All these cases, it's like, yeah, they have to do this. She was born, of course, on May 24th, 1819, and Queen Victoria was actually 5th in line when she was born, nowhere near the throne. So right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely that she would ever see the crown. But one by one, all of her family members began passing away fast. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed away, and then her father and her grandfather both died 1 week apart from one another. So on one hand, obviously it's sad, it's tragic, everyone's dealing with loss so fast. But on the other hand, by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next up to bat for the throne at 11. Imagine, that's like some ancient Egypt. Number 6, the Great Irish Famine. The Great Irish Famine took out many people. Back in 1845, potato crop that a lot of the Irish population relied on were suddenly no longer available. See, a group of microorganisms wiped them out, and in result, around 1 million folks died or had to leave. Now, it was draconian law and British ruling at this point that made the exported food hard to reach people. That's where things stopped. This famine led to Irish independence, of course, and anti-union movements. And the show Victoria pulled back 0 punches in 2017, where an episode showed the true happenings behind the Great Irish Famine and the role that Queen Victoria played in coming to the aid of her then subjects. It was the death of at least 1 million people. This was a very dark 7 years in Irish history. Historian Christine Keneally spoke out and says, quote, "There is no evidence that she had any real compassion for the Irish people in any way." Yikes. That's a historian saying that. That's how you know.
Number 5, the Queen had weights sewn into her headlines. So picture this, the regal, poised figure of Queen Elizabeth II, adorned in her elegant outfits, but what you might not know is that hidden within those impeccable garments were weights. Yep, weights sewn into her clothes. But why would the Queen, or any royal for that matter, resort to such a seemingly unconventional measure? The answer lies in practicality and precision. You see, maintaining that signature royal grace, especially outdoors, can be very challenging when the wind decides to dance with one's clothing. Been there, done that, not fun. To prevent any wardrobe malfunctions and to ensure her attire remained impeccable, small weights were discreetly added to the hems of her dresses and skirts. This prevented them from billowing or flying up in gusts of wind, preserving her dignified appearance. Yeah, it's not fun when that happens. It's a fascinating glimpse into the meticulous attention to detail that goes into every aspect of royal life, right down to the clothing. So it may seem a little weird to think about, weights sewn into regal attire. It's just one of the many secrets behind the seemingly effortless poise and elegance of the former British monarch. Number 4, bad news. So remember the need for the black dress I chatted about just like a moment ago? Alrighty, so imagine this. You're a queen, head of the state, and you find out that your father, the previous king, has passed away, not from like a personal message or a trusted source, but from a news broadcast. Crazy, isn't it? Well, this is exactly what happened to Queen Elizabeth II on February 6th of 1952. She was in Kenya on a royal tour with her husband when her father, King George, died unexpectedly in his sleep. The news was delivered to her through a radio broadcast, as the remote location had limited means of communication. This incident sheds light on the complexities of being a monarch, where personal emotions are often intertwined with the demands of duty. Queen Elizabeth's sudden transition to the throne was a momentous event in British history, and it came with the weight of responsibility, even in the face of personal grief. It's a poignant reminder that even the highest figures in the land can be caught off guard by the unpredictability of life, and duty sometimes takes precedence over personal feelings, even in the most unsettling of circumstances. Yeah, that's something I'm kind of familiar with. Number 3, the Queen's uncle was a what now? Alrighty folks, disclaimer time. The interwebs don't like when I say the name of the bad guy German group from the Second World War, so bear with me here. Edward VIII was briefly king until the abdication crises of 1936, when he abandoned the throne to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson. The couple visited Germany, where they had a meeting with the evil dictator, whose name I cannot say, trust me I wish I could for this, according to the BBC. Photographs of the royal encouraging the Queen and Princess to do a, certain salute in 1933 while they were, very young, was also published in The Sun in 2015. Look, the princess could not have known at the time what the salute meant, or what its connotations would later become. While the extent of Edward's political leanings remain a subject of debate, it's clear that his actions raised some eyebrows both within and outside the royal family. Edward's ties cast a shadow over his legacy, especially during a time when Britain was at war with the Yahtzees. His abdication and subsequent ascension of Queen Elizabeth's father were pivotal moments in British history. This unsettling fact reminds us that even within the highest ranks of royalty, complex and controversial figures can emerge, leaving a lasting impact on the course of history. Yikes. Number 2, the family filmed a secret documentary. Alrighty, Lost Media folks, this one is for you. In the dark corners of royal history, there exists a truly unique relic, a documentary filmed by the British royal family in 1969, which was broadcast one time and one time only, and then seemingly vanished into obscurity. The documentary, known as Royal Family, was an attempt to offer a more candid and relatable view of the monarchy to the public. This unprecedented insight into the lives of royals included scenes of them at play, their domestic routines, and intimate family moments. Now, Queen Elizabeth II herself reportedly approved the project, hoping it would humanize the monarchy in the eyes of the British people. However, the documentary received mixed reactions. While some appreciated the glimpse into the royal household, others found it unsettling, feeling that it demystified the monarchy to an uncomfortable degree. Intriguingly, after its initial broadcast, this documentary was shelved and has never been shown again on television. It remains locked away in the royal archives, inaccessible to the public. This captivating historical tidbit raises quite a few questions about the balance between, preserving the mystique of royalty, but also the desire for transparency in our modern age. The fact that it was broadcast one time and one time only, and then hidden away, ooh, I'd love to get my fingers on it and just see what's up. How bad can it be? Number 1, they work hard to preserve the lineage. So back in the early days of aviation, when flying was still a very risky endeavor, a peculiar and somewhat unsettling rule was enforced within the British royal family. 2 heirs to the throne were never allowed to travel together on the same flight. This seemingly paranoid practice was rooted in a desire to ensure the continuity of the monarchy in the event of a tragic accident. Well, imagine a scenario where an unfortunate plane crash would take everybody out, and then where's your lineage? This would throw the entire line of succession into chaos. So to mitigate this risk, the royal protocol dictated that direct heirs, such as the reigning monarch and their immediate successor, should not travel in the same plane. This practice persisted for several decades, only changing as aviation safety improved over time. Thankfully, today's air travel is far safer, and such practices have become relics of the past.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Kensington system. Queen Victoria's reign began in 1837 and it lasted up until her death in 1901. She was just 18 years old when she found herself on the throne, and it was all by chance, as she was actually 5th in line when she was born. This is all stressful enough, but certainly one of the worst parts of her upbringing was being brought up under the Kensington system. This basically all started when her mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, created this system in order to control her daughter, literally just isolated her away from all of her friends and even from other family members, and apparently this was done to keep her quote-unquote pure. The Duchess would monitor her every move, she would decide who she could see and who she could speak to, and Victoria only had 2 friends she could play with growing up, one being her half-sister and the other being her mother's attendant, Sir John Conroy. Victoria was even forced to share a room with her mother until she was queen. She couldn't even walk down the hall by herself. In the end, Victoria placed a lot of blame on John Conroy for manipulating her mother. She even called him the demon incarnate. In our number 9 spot today, we have the royal affairs. There have been many rumors over the years about the royal family and their extramarital affairs. Okay, I'm not saying it's a tradition, but it happens a lot, and I'm saying this goes way back. So far back that one of the first accusations of this within the royal family dates all the way back to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Since then, it has only continued with people such as Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend, Princess Anne and Commander Timothy Lawrence, and of course King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla, just to name a few. The latter of those definitely being the most famous, especially when the now king was confronted about it by his wife at the time, the beloved Princess Diana. Apparently, King Charles responded to the confrontation by saying, quote, "Well, I refuse to be the only Prince of Wales who never had a mistress." Maybe not the attitude to keep when you're speaking to your wife, who you're cheating on. I don't know. Guess I'm just not royal enough to get it. In our number 8 spot today, we have pets. As we all know very well, image is everything for the royal family, and that is down to the finest, smallest detail, including pets. It is well known that the Queen absolutely loved corgis, and how could we possibly blame her? Apparently, however, if a dog is not a corgi or a Labrador, it is socially looked down upon. Can't describe how insane that is. They're dogs. If you brought a dog who had just been rolling around in the mud everywhere with you, I could see
why that wouldn't be as widely accepted among fancy social circles, but only giving the choice of a few random breeds seems kind of ridiculous. Apparently Meghan Markle actually had to give up her beagle named Guy a few years ago before she joined the family, and then left it. I guess she can probably have whatever dog she wants now, so there's always an upside. In our number 7 spot today, we have King Charles I. Okay, this is one that goes way back and it really creeps me out. So King Charles I, right now we're on the 3rd, so we're taking it a couple back. King Charles I was tried for treason after the Civil War, and he ended up being beheaded in 1649. I guess in the 1600s everyone was beheaded, so this wasn't necessarily abnormal, which is certainly weird, but that's a history lesson for another day. The weird part of this, however, is that apparently his head was sewn back on his body so that he could sit for a portrait, or it was perhaps supposed to be a sign of respect. Either way, it's very weird and very gross. I feel terrible for whoever's job it was to do that, and I also feel bad for the artist who was forced to paint that. Talk about traumatic. It does certainly make sense though that people say that Charles' ghost still haunts a building, because there is no amount of haunting that could make up for being beheaded and then having your head sewn back onto your body. Okay, why'd we do the first part if we were gonna do the second? Could've just cut the middleman, you know? But instead, they cut his head off, okay? In our number 6 spot today, we have never travel in pairs. This is one travel rule that certainly makes sense, but it is really dark when you think about it. This rule is one that the British royal family, and honestly many people who can afford this sort of luxury safety, do nowadays. This tradition and rule is one that means that any heirs to the throne are not allowed to travel together. This is of course in case some sort of accident happens. Not every heir to the throne would be injured or perhaps killed. It's definitely very smart and sensible, but it has got to be grim, just constantly preparing for the worst thing to happen. It is of the utmost importance to the royal family that they preserve the line to the throne. Like I mentioned before, however, other people are now taking a page out of the royal book and are using this travel rule where possible.